Bjork is a superstar of our generation, adored by millions all over the world. But in 1996, one man's obsession took him to very dark places. Ricardo Lopez thought he was in love with Bjork. The whole time, she had no idea who he was. But he couldn't stand to see her with anyone else, and so he started keeping video diaries detailing how he was going to send her straight to hell. He wanted the two of them to be together forever, whether that was in this life or the next. So thank God it's Freaky Friday. Today we're going to be talking about depraved celebrity stalkers. Before we get into the episode, I just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, Skillshare. I am so excited to be working with Skillshare because I have used it so much over the years. I literally put everyone on to Skillshare. All of my team that I work with has it because it's just so useful for everything. Skillshare is an online learning community with tons of classes where you can develop your current skills or learn new ones, or generally just get creatively inspired. It's actually the largest online learning community, and for good reason. I mean, I am obsessed. It's been life-changing for me. Anytime I don't know something, or like I want to learn a skill, or I want to get better at something, I search it up on Skillshare straight away, and there's pretty much always a class on it. I've used it especially a lot throughout my YouTube journey, like when I was doing my own editing and thumbnails, I would always like learn to do Photoshop on there. I recently took a class on there called Notion for YouTube Creators. Easily manage your creative projects by Asante Bean, and it was so useful because Notion is literally life-changing. It is such a good productivity tool, but I've always found it kind of hard to use. I've never understood it, so I've been missing out this whole entire time. I'm not gonna lie, Notion is quite a confusing software to get to grips with, but this Skillshare class broke it down so easily, and I've learned it all, and I've actually retained it all as well. It's all about how to manage multiple creative projects all at once, which is something I struggle with. I struggle really bad. I get so stressed and confused and burnt out. So having like a tool like Notion, it's helped me stay on top of everything. It's helped, especially with this new series, Freaky Friday. Hope you guys are enjoying, by the way. And you don't learn all on your own when you're doing a Skillshare class, which is one of my favorite things. Like I say, there's a community with it. You're always connected with the other members, whether that's through the discussion boards or the project galleries. Each class has its own project gallery where you can like upload the work that you have done from that class, and I love that bit because I am nosy and I want to see what everyone else is doing. Skillshare has literally thousands of classes that you can take, and they're on so many different subjects. There's something for everyone, whether that's like marketing or photography or YouTube and social media, even practical things like sewing and cooking. I once did an interior design class before I moved to this apartment because I was like, I have never decorated before and I need some help. Honestly, whatever you're looking for, there's probably a Skillshare class on it. And Skillshare are very kindly giving you guys, the EleanorNeale viewers, a special offer. The first 500 of you to click the link down below in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. I think it's amazing. I think you can't go wrong with Skillshare, especially if you're someone that's always looking to learn and improve yourself, if you're a productivity girly. I love it because I can never sit still for 2 minutes. I'm always focusing on a new hobby or a new skill or something new. It's great just to bring newness into your life. So thank you so much, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. I'm so chuffed about it. Now, before we get into today's Freaky Friday episode, I just want to warn you that this video will cover a lot of sensitive topics, including suicide and stalking, so viewer discretion is advised. And while we make every effort to fact check our sources and make sure that all of our information is correct, no action should be taken in reliance upon the information in this video. All opinions in this video are mine and mine alone, and with that being said, thank God it's Freaky Friday. Let's jump into the story of Bjork's stalker and a bunch of other ones. In the strange relationship between celebrities and the general public, there's always a very fine line to tread where innocent admiration could easily become dangerous obsession. Celebrities are often very grateful for the support that they receive, but it's in everyone's best interests that fans keep a healthy distance from the celebrities that they love. There are far too many instances where that line is crossed, healthy boundaries are lost, and it can have horrifying, sometimes fatal consequences for fans and celebrities alike. On the morning of September 16th, 1996, Florida police received a phone call about a very foul odor coming from an apartment just north of Miami Beach. That morning at 7:30 a.m., a maintenance worker had arrived at this apartment complex. He was just there to do a couple of jobs, but he couldn't even focus because there was such a horrific smell. It was filling the whole complex. This guy immediately knew that something wasn't right. This wasn't good. So he starts trying to pinpoint where the smell is coming from, and he figured out it was probably coming from apartment A. So he gets closer and he's inspecting the apartment a little more, and that was when he noticed blood literally seeping through the walls of this apartment. He wasted no time calling the police. They rushed straight down to the apartment complex and bust down the door of apartment A. And what they found inside was like a scene out of a twisted horror movie. Laying lifeless on the floor was the dead, naked body of a man. There was blood splashed up the walls that had clearly seeped through. That was what the maintenance worker had seen on the other side, and the blood was all over this guy. But what was really strange about the way that he was found was underneath all of this splashed blood, the man's face was covered in thick grease paint in colours red, green and black. It was honestly a very disturbing sight. Investigators had never seen anything like this before. He was completely naked, and then from the neck up was just painted. The worst part is this man hardly even looked human when they found him, because his body had been decomposing in that apartment. They found out for 4 whole days, and so his body that wasn't covered in paint had started to discolour. He was going blue, and then his head was painted in this like red-green pattern. And if discovering a dead body wasn't awful enough, things were about to get way worse. This small apartment was very cluttered, it was very messy, but one object stood out among the piles of clothes and junk. Opposite this man's dead body was a camera sat on top of a tripod, and it was pointed directly at presumably where the man had been sitting. It was clear that the camera was positioned there in order to film this man's death, but why? And who had put it there? On the walls of the apartment around this man, there were a bunch of different messages scrawled on the wall. One of them read, "The best of me, September 12th. On another part of the wall, there was a slur written that's used against African Americans. That will make sense later on in the story, but I mean, at first that was very random. But the weirdest message written on the wall by far was one that said, "The 8mm videos are documentation of a crime. Terrorist matter. They are for the FBI." Of course, this took the case to a whole new level. Now police feared that this man had been abducted or held hostage and murdered by terrorists, and maybe even forced to record a message on this camera. But in reality, that wasn't the case. When police found these videotapes, they showed one man's growing psychotic obsession with the pop star Bjork. Inside the camera itself was a videotape that was labelled "The Last Day." And when police watched the tape back, they realised that this was no hostage terrorist situation at all. This was a suicide, filmed by the dead man himself. In fact, it was more than just the suicide, it was the documentation of this one man's final day on Earth. The tape begins with the man preparing to go to the post office. He's got a package in his hand, and he seems very suspicious about the whole thing and says that he is very nervous. He says that if he raises any suspicions at the post office when he goes to try and post this package, then he will just kill himself. Rather than be arrested, he would just kill himself in the post office. The camera then cuts to him having returned home. He was successful sending that package apparently. And when the next clip begins, he is now completely naked and shaving his head. And we're given no explanation for any of this. Although the man appears calm in these videos. He doesn't talk much. The noise in the video is literally just like the TV in the background. He's just doing all of this. When he finishes shaving his head, he cuts off the camera and starts it again 20 minutes later. And at this point, he's put all the face paint on. He is he looks really scary. I couldn't find if this face paint meant anything. If any of you guys recognize it anyhow, other than related to this case, then let me know. But the man examines his face in the mirror and tells the camera that he is a little nervous now. I'm definitely not drunk. I am not depressed. I know exactly what I am doing. The man sits down and puts on a Bjork song, I Remember You. And from that point, he seems very visibly anxious. This whole time he'd seemed quite calm, but now he's breathing heavily. He seems like he's scared of what he's about to do. When the song comes to an end, the man shouts out victory and then pulls out a handgun and shoots himself in the mouth. His body falls out of the camera's range and he's dead. That he killed himself on tape, and the video ended eventually when the camera ran out of battery. Police couldn't believe their eyes watching this video. This was so much to process with very little context. They had no idea why any of this had happened. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, it's very much only beginning. Police reviewed all of the other tapes. I think there were 11 in total, and that helped to give a lot more context. They very quickly find out that this man had a disturbing obsession with Bjork, and I don't use the word obsession lightly. This was fucked up. He wasn't a stan, he was scary. Bjork was pretty much all he talked about in the other tapes. It was quite interesting that he didn't really say much about her in the last one, because all these other tapes were just full of him talking about how much he loved her. She seemed to be the only reason for his existence. He said that he never stopped thinking about her. His whole life was consumed with Bjork. But as the police work their way through the tapes, this man's attitude seems to change. It becomes clear that Bjork was the reason for his pain. He starts to become really angry and get quite cruel about her. He wished that she would just notice him, and he started getting really angry that she hadn't. He starts wishing for bad things to happen to Bjork, and in the very next tape, they see him constructing a letter bomb to send to her house in London. The police watch in horror as this man constructs this whole bomb on camera, completely naked, and not saying a single word. Trust me, it is disturbing in multiple different ways. I don't know how this man knew how to build a bomb. I guess he just spent a lot of hours on the dark corners of the internet. But he does the whole thing very calmly. He was very, very calm in all these videos. He'd like hollowed out a book, and then he tells the camera that he's pouring sulfuric acid into it. And then he says, with a little glint in his eye, that this bomb is gonna send Bjork straight to hell. And this was that same mysterious package from the beginning of the suicide tape. Remember, he was saying that he was worried about going to the post office, worried that people would get suspicious, but he came back and said that he'd been successful. So that bomb was out there somewhere, on its way to Bjork in London. So now police had to locate this literal ticking time bomb before it hurt someone, before it killed someone. And of course, Bjork didn't know about any of this. She was blissfully unaware that someone had just made an attempt to kill her, and it could work. Now, if you don't know much about Bjork, she's an Icelandic singer. You've probably heard her song, It's Oh So Quiet. Shh, you're welcome for that rendition, hey. But she has a load of big hits, including Army of Me, Big Time Sensuality, Venus as a Boy, my favourite, and Human Behaviour. Or you might just know Bjork for her very distinctive look. She's very eccentric in the way that she presents herself. Her looks always make a statement. She serves concepts. She serves like whole characters. Bjork's whole vibe is essentially like she is not from the same planet as the rest of us, and she does it well. Probably one of the most famous images of Bjork is her in the swan dress at the Oscars red carpet in 2001. At the time, it was really ridiculed, was that outfit. Everyone thought it was hideous. But now, it is literally one of the most iconic red carpet looks of all time. I saw a bunch of people recreating the swan dress look for Halloween this year, but like with peace and love, none of them hold a candle to the original. Bjork slayed that. Because when she wore it to the Oscars, she even had like matching accessories to go along with it. She had these eggs that she laid as she was walking down the red carpet. They would literally like just drop. She's just got an egg at her feet. It was great. And this is what I mean by she serves whole concepts. Like everyone else was going to the Oscars in their beautiful gowns and just smiling in the pictures. She said, no, I'm gonna be a swan actually for this. Bjork kind of came out of the womb already a megastar. Like, she was always destined for great things. She was 30 years old at the time of this case, but she was born on November 21st, 1965 in Reykjavik, Iceland. She's one of the most famous people to ever come out of Iceland and make it big worldwide. And I mean, she had been famous. She had been famous in her native country since she was a child. She'd been classically trained in music since the age of 5, which is crazy. But it was at 11 years old that she started recording her own versions of folk songs, and she got really big doing that at 11. So she was a bit of a child prodigy. So she was a bit of a child prodigy. I can't say that word. Oh, basically, she'd been doing music for a long time. Bjork didn't know life without music. She didn't know life without creative expression, and she was good at it. She did it so well. As she grew up, Bjork had a few like normal jobs, but she never stopped working on her music. She was always either in a band on the side or working on her solo stuff. When she was 18 years old, she found success as part of a punk band called the Sugar Cubes. Bjork was their lead vocalist. And they did pretty well. The band was together for 5 years. They put out 2 albums together, but eventually broke up. And this allowed Bjork to embark on her solo career. Her debut album was called Debut, and it debuted in 1993 to huge success. It was a really, really well-performing first album. Debut album, actually, debut, guys. Bjork was very experimental. She liked to be outside of the box, never in the box. Don't let Bjork in the box. She hated being told what to do or who she was or what genre she fit into. She didn't want to be in a box, guys. To me, Bjork is way more than just a singer. She is a unique presence. She is just an artiste in every single way. But behind the scenes, Bjork is actually a very, very shy person. She's gotten over it a little bit now as she's become more famous. She's just a lot more natural with things like that. But when she first started getting a bit of fame, she was so scared of like interviews and photographs and just talking to people outside of her music. Her music was where she felt the most comfortable, and interviews were not. So when she moved to London in the 90s to kind of propel her music career, she decided that she was gonna change. She was gonna try and be more outgoing. And that she did. She started doing a lot of talk shows and interviews and magazines and stuff like that, and she really came out of her shell. And her fans responded very well to it. They loved getting to know Bjork behind the music. But as she began sharing all of this information with the world, there was one man that was overanalyzing every word she said, every move she made. The more he learned about Bjork, the more he became obsessed with her, the more he wanted to meet her and speak with her. He was willing to go further than any other fan would. His name was Ricardo Lopez. He was born on January 14th, 1975 in Uruguay. His family moved to the US when he was still very young, and he'd lived in Florida most of his life. Ricardo was an extremely intelligent child, but he decided to drop out of school to pursue art. But his art career never did anything. He was repeatedly rejected from different art schools, and this knocked his confidence to an unsalvageable level. He had no self-esteem in his self, or like he had no confidence in his art. He stopped taking himself seriously. He stopped taking his art seriously. Facing all of these knockbacks so early on in life, he never bounced back ever again. Ricardo's family said that he was a normal guy. You know, there was nothing too weird about him. He was shy, he was introverted, and he never really had girlfriends or female friends, but they didn't think that was an issue. They thought he was just a socially awkward guy. At the time of this case, when he was 21 years old, he'd still never been able to talk to women. He'd never even had, like, female friends. To be fair though, he didn't have that many male friends either. But the women thing was such a huge insecurity of his. He hated that he couldn't get a girlfriend and that women weren't interested in him. It made him hate himself even more. He seemed very embarrassed of his physical appearance especially, and in a multitude of different ways. He always wrote about all the different things he hated about himself. But the one thing about himself that he seemed to hate the most was that he had a condition named gynecomastia, and this this is where a man will begin to develop breast tissue, and it can often grow quite large, usually due to a hormonal imbalance, but this effectively left Ricardo with breasts. And he was tormented by this daily. I mean, it was all mental torment, it was his own torment. No one else was really saying or being mean to him. Like, it was all him hurting himself about all of this. It got to the point where he had eroded his own self-esteem so much that he felt completely worthless in life. He felt like he didn't deserve a girlfriend. He didn't deserve friends or a good job or a social life. So Ricardo just pretty much gave up at such a young age. He was just a teenager and he decided that his life was worth nothing. Of course, he dropped out of school and never managed to get back into one, so he didn't bother with a job really. He started distancing himself from his friends. Not that he really had that many, but the few people that he did interact with stopped hearing from him. He was steadily drifting away from reality. The real world didn't appeal to him. He wasn't having a good time there, and he didn't like who he was in the real world. By the age of 17, Ricardo Lopez was a recluse. He didn't speak to anyone, even his own family, and he's not even an adult yet, and he is completely distanced from his family. Well, maybe not completely. They were in irregular contact, but he doesn't, like, they're not around him, you know? As a means of escape, Ricardo became invested in other people's lives that he liked better than his own life. He would read about celebrities and artists and musicians, and he would watch videos of them on TV, and he became consumed with these people's perfect dream lives. He became utterly captivated by female celebrities in particular. It all started when he first watched Thelma and Louise, and he fell in love with Gina Davis. He watched that film hundreds of times. He learnt it pretty much word for word. He would just watch it back to back all the time because he wanted to see Gina. And then he realised that she had other movies that he could watch, so he bought all of those, and he would just have Gina Davis marathons day in, day out. He had nothing else to do. He became so obsessed that he would buy anything that had anything to do with Gina Davis. And so one day he found a magazine, bought it, read about her, and his heart was crushed when he found out that she was getting married. And that just totally ruined the illusion for him. He lost all interest in her. And actually, he did more than lost interest in her. He became angry with her. It's eerily similar to the case of Christina Grimmie, if you remember that. We covered it on the channel a while ago, where Christina's stalker was so obsessed and in love with her, and then he found out that she had a boyfriend, and he just completely turned on her and then wanted to kill her, the woman that he loved and adored a couple of hours ago. That's the thing with such obsessive stalkers, especially like romantic stalkers. If they can't have the object of their desire, then they don't want anyone else to have them. They feel like personally betrayed by the celebrity, even though the celebrity has no idea they even exist, but they feel like he felt like Gina Davis had personally cheated on him with this other guy. He'd been living in this bubble for so long where he had allowed his obsession with Gina Davis to run wild, and he really truly felt like they were together. They spent so much time together through her movies and stuff that, yeah, he felt very connected to her. And then every time that he was brought back to reality, for example, when reading in this magazine that she's getting married, it would just completely crush him. His devotion turned to hatred. There's a thing called celebrity worship syndrome, which is like exactly what I'm just talking about, is where people become so obsessed with celebrities that it starts to delude them. They genuinely become a bit insane. And celebrity worship syndrome and stalking and sometimes violence often go hand in hand. It's really scary how many similar cases there are to Bjork, to Christina Grimmie. During our research for this video, we came across an insane case of this that I'd never actually heard of. Jodie Foster and her stalker, John Hinckley. It all started in 1975 when Jodie was just 12 years old and she starred in a movie called Taxi Driver. Now, we actually spoke about this in the first Freaky Friday episode, all about like the abuse of women and children in Hollywood. Jodie played a child sex worker in Taxi Driver. And as gross as that is to think about, this movie really launched Jodie's career. This is what made her a celebrity for the rest of her life. But it was also the start of a traumatic and bizarre series of events. When John Hinckley first saw the movie Taxi Driver, he became infatuated with 12-year-old Jodie. And this is a grown man. I actually don't know how old he was. I will Google. Okay, it turns out he was 21 when it started. But just you wait, it went on for years. And just like Ricardo Lopez, John Hinckley had not very much going for him, should we say it like that? He didn't have a job, he didn't have friends, he didn't really have family. Well, he was completely estranged from his family. He was hooked on Valium. He had recently been expelled from a literal neo-Nazi group for being too extremist. Imagine being fired from the Nazi group for being too much of a Nazi. How that's actually insane. But anyway, Hinckley goes to watch Taxi Driver. He becomes obsessed with Jodie's character in the movie. And he also becomes obsessed with the guy that saves Jodie's character in the movie. Robert De Niro played a guy called Travis who rescued this little girl. And somewhere in Hinckley's deluded mind, he decided that he needed to be like Travis from the movie. And that way he could, rescue Jodie and Jodie would love him and she would want to be with him. I don't know how that would win her over, but anyway, he decides he needs to be Travis. So he starts to dress like him. He's wearing all military, army clothes and boots, and he starts keeping a diary because Travis kept a diary in the movie. Of course, there's no logic behind any of this at all, but John Hinckley was so buried in all of his delusions that to him this made sense. The line between fantasy and reality, real and movie, was starting to blur for him. Well, it had been blurred for a fucking long time actually, wasn't it? This went on for years, right? He was actively obsessed with Jodie Foster, actively trying to be Travis from Taxi Driver. And when Jodie turned 18, she enrolled in university. Hinckley was still following her every move, and he managed to find out her university address. He starts sending fan mail to where she lives. And, this wasn't the first time Jodie Foster had received some disturbing fan mail. She was... I feel very bad for young Jodie Foster. Men treated her as if she was a fully grown woman before she'd even started her period. So she was unfortunately no stranger to creepy men's fan mail. So she just kind of threw it away. She didn't think much of it. Usually these men would send 1, maybe 2 letters and then give up when they realised that she's not gonna write back. But not John Hinckley. He would send multiple. Every single day he would send poems, photographs, letters, songs that he'd written, all of them letting Jodie know how much he loved her and wanted to be with her. She never wrote back to him at all, of course, and he started to get very frustrated with this. He wanted to get in contact with her so bad, and somehow he managed to find her private phone number. I don't know how. I guess things were a bit easier a few decades ago when people weren't as safety conscious. But whatever, John finds her phone number and calls it up, and he actually recorded the very brief conversation that they had on the phone. Jodie picked it up and asked who it was, and he responded, "This is the person that's been leaving notes in your box for 2 days." I imagine Jodie very quickly put the phone down after hearing that, and he kept trying to call her up and she blocked the number. She was not answering him ever again. But this only made him even more angry because he'd had a little taste of it. He'd gotten her to pick up the phone. And that's the thing about celebrity worship syndrome, is that it's addictive. I guess not physically, obviously, but mentally, emotionally addictive. You get the little dopamine hits when you find a new photo of them, or this when they actually answer a phone call. He was addicted to trying to get to know Jodie Foster. At the end of 1980, John Hinckley became desperate. At this point, it had been 4 years since he'd seen Taxi Driver, so 4 whole years of obsession. So that New Year's Eve, John Hinckley grabs a camera and makes a video diary where he says, "Jodie is the only thing that matters now. Anything I might do in 1981 would be solely for Jodie Foster's sake. I think I'd rather just see her not on Earth than being with other guys." Which is just so chilling to hear that he would literally rather this woman die than be in a relationship that's not with him. 3 months after that recording, Hinckley wrote his final letter to Jodie Foster, and in this one, he detailed his plans for what he called a historic deed, which would echo the plot of her movie Taxi Driver, the movie that made him fall in love with her when she was 12 years old. And of course, when he recreates the plot of Taxi Driver, he is going to play Robert De Niro's character Travis. Of course, he already has all the outfits, he's already been writing in the diary, he has become Travis. And if you've seen Taxi Driver, or if you know the plot, you know where this is going. In the movie, Travis literally kills the President of the United States to save Jodie's character, I think. I don't know, I haven't seen it. I'm not watching it either. I don't want to watch that. But Hinckley was literally threatening the exact same thing. To kill the actual real life president of the United States, who was Ronald Reagan at the time. In this last letter to Jodie, he wrote, "Jodie, I would abandon this idea of getting Reagan in a second if I could only win your heart and live out the rest of my life with you, whether it be in total obscurity or whatever. I will admit to you that the reason I'm going ahead with this attempt now is because I just cannot wait any longer to impress you. I've got to do something now to make you understand in no uncertain terms that I am doing all of this for your sake." Which is just fucking ridiculous. She has never once even, like, first of all, she don't know who you are. Second of all, she's never asked for this. Third of all, why do you think she wants that? Why? Well, I guess it's just because he was so deluded that he can't tell the difference between Jodie Foster and her character in the movie. But why the fuck would Jodie Foster want that? Like, why would any 18-year-old girl be like, wow, he killed the president for me. Wow, what a dream, but what the fuck? Like, does he not realise that he's just going to be hauled off to prison and just never see Jodie Foster ever again? But anyway, John Hinckley never actually posted this final letter to Jodie. He just left it on the side in his hotel room. He probably knew that police were going to end up searching that hotel room later on, so might as well just leave it. He then left his hotel room and walked to a nearby hotel, another one, where Ronald Reagan was... He had an engagement of some sort. Hinckley waited outside. He kind of like hid in a bush or something and waited until Reagan appeared. And when he did, Hinckley opened fire. He fired 6 shots in less than 2 seconds, and he didn't successfully assassinate the president, but he did cause a whole lot of destruction with those 6 shots. The first bullet hit the White House press secretary, who would become permanently disabled from the effects of this bullet and then die 33 years later due to the complications from that day. There was a police officer and a Secret Service agent who threw themselves in the line of fire to protect the president, and they both died. John Hinckley in total had 3 victims that day, 3 people that died because of this attack. Hinckley was wrestled to the ground and arrested, but not before his final bullet ricocheted off the side of the president's limo or whatever he travelled in, and it actually hit Ronald Reagan under his arm. In all the chaos, he didn't even notice that he'd been shot. He got back into the limo and then started coughing up blood. And of course, he survived this assassination attempt. It's become an infamous assassination attempt, but it was a very close call. Later that evening, as Hinckley had expected, police went and searched his hotel room and found that letter. And this was when Jodie Foster was first made aware of this man and what he'd just done to get her attention. She felt sick to her stomach when she found out about this, that 3 people, well, 2 people at that point, had died because this man just desperately wanted to get her attention. Jodie was actually in attendance at Hinckley's trial so that she could stand up there and testify that they never had any kind of relationship. She'd never told him to do any of this. She'd never, she had nothing to do with this man, basically. And actually, when Jodie said this in court, Hinckley yelled back at her, "I'll get you, Foster." He was actually found not guilty at the end of his trial, but it was on grounds of insanity. I mean, how could it not be? He was detained in a psychiatric hospital only to be released in 2016 on the condition that he never contacted Jodie Foster ever again. Cases like this one are ones that Ricardo would have seen heavily reported on in the media, and he really liked the media. I guess he didn't really have much else to be doing when he was like holed up in his house this whole time. Of course, he's obsessed with celebrities, specific celebrities, but still. He might have even taken inspiration from cases like this. You don't know what's going on in these people's minds. He could have been so insane that he saw these men as role models. And things really haven't changed much at all since the 90s. When it comes to people's parasocial relationships with celebrities, they're unhealthier than they ever have been these days. I mean, there's even a very recent example that I saw recently of Drew Barrymore and Renee Rapp doing like, I think like a Q&A. They had little microphones, they were sat on a stage, and all of a sudden they were accosted by a stalker.
People. Oh my God, yes, hi.
I'm Chad Michael Busto, you know who I am. I need to see you at some point while I'm here in New York City. Okay?
Allegedly, that man is Drew Barrymore's longtime stalker. So who knows how many places he's followed her to, and oh my God, it's just horrifying to think about that celebrities always have to be on high alert for people trying to kill them or people trying to do whatever. People have always been deluded and dangerous when it comes to celebrities. Nothing's changed from Jodie Foster to Bjork to Drew Barrymore. Female celebrities in particular are always at risk. So back to Ricardo Lopez, who was now looking for a new fixation after his old one, Gina Davis, broke his little heart. He needed a new woman to worship and fantasize about, and this was actually all happening around the time that Bjork released her debut album in 1993. And with the release of that, her music videos were everywhere, and that was when Ricardo spotted her for the first time. He saw the music video for Human Behavior and he was just mesmerized by Bjork's angelic voice, her uniqueness. And from that moment on, his life was consumed with Bjork everything. For the next 3 years, he thought about very little other than her. He wanted to know everything about her in every way. He wanted to know every detail of her personal life, her career, where she was traveling to, who she was friends with, anything, everything she did. He wanted to know about it. He filled his apartment with posters of Bjork and spent his days writing tons and tons of fan mail to her. At first, he was kind of a normal fan. It didn't immediately begin like full-fledged obsession the second he saw her. Although, I mean, he did really, really like her the first time he saw her. But at first, it seemed a lot more healthy, a lot more normal, because Ricardo himself was an artist, or wanted to be an artist. Remember, he dropped out of school to try and get into art school, and it had never really worked, but he was inspired by Bjork. One of the things that he loved the most about Bjork was her uniqueness, how creative and unusual she was, and how she didn't care what people thought. She was gonna make her shit that she wanted to make and put it out there, regardless of what people thought. So from the outside, especially in the beginning, this obsession, or like what was in the early stages of an obsession, seemed quite normal. The family that he was still in infrequent contact with knew that he liked this woman, Bjork, this singer, and he was very inspired by her, and that was all they knew. It just seemed normal to them. But as time passed, his fixation on Bjork became all-consuming, and Ricardo was growing more and more disconnected from reality once again. He even went one step further than he ever had before, and he found Bjork's home address on the internet. I don't know how he did that, and that's very fucking scary. He started keeping a diary, which was essentially like his Bjork diary, where he would just like write everything that he found out about her. He wanted to know everything there was to know about this woman. And he was keeping other journals as well, where he would talk about how desperately he wanted her to love him back. He said that he specifically wanted to be a person who had an effect on her life. And that he fucking did. But one of the strangest things that he wrote in these journals was that he actually wanted to invent a time machine so that he could go back and befriend Bjork when she was a child. What the fuck? Like, that's just weird. That's just so weird. What does he mean by that? Why? Why do you want to meet Bjork as a child? I want to know if he would be an adult or a child in that situation as well. I suppose there is no point trying to make sense of anything that he said or did, because none of it makes any sense. But you know what? He does go on to say in these journals that his fantasies about Bjork are not sexual in nature. In fact, he said, I couldn't have sex with Bjork because I love her. Which may sound strange, but this is typical incel thinking. And if you don't know what an incel is, strap in. Get ready for a wild ride, I'm about to tell you. And you're gonna wish I never did. So incel actually stands for or it's short for involuntary celibate. Basically people that are not getting laid, but they really want to be, and they can't do anything about it because women just don't like them. Or they can't speak to women, or like, I don't know, there's usually reasons why these men are not getting sex, and they're usually very angry about it. Like, they're very angry at women in general for withholding sex from them. A lot of them consider themselves to be unattractive, socially awkward. They do the same thing that Ricardo kind of did to himself, where he wore down his own self-esteem. He would tell himself all the time that he was worthless and that he was never going to do anything, and so he didn't. I mean, sometimes I feel like your words and your thoughts create your reality, and incels are kind of proof of that. They call themselves subhuman. They don't even see themselves as the same species as the women that they can't win over. Ricardo saying that he couldn't have sex with Bjork because he loves her is very Madonna whore complex, if you've heard of that. It's basically where men will put a woman into one of two categories. Either she's a Madonna, she's like a virgin, who is pure and virtuous and maternal, she's a wife. Or she's a whore. Plain and simple. I don't need to explain that one to you. And it seems like Ricardo puts women into the Madonna whore complex. He couldn't see himself having sex with Bjork because he views her as too precious and innocent and sweet. But as soon as she wasn't like pure and innocent and sweet anymore, she would be dead to him because she would be a whore in his mind then. There's no middle ground for men that think like this. They don't even see women as like 3D people with thoughts and feelings and emotions. They see them as sex object or wife. And it makes me sick to my stomach. So if you're one of those people that thinks in a Madonna whore complex, get therapy, please. A lot of the time, incels aren't even really looking for sex anymore. They've kind of given up on it, but they're still mad about it. They just kind of believe in like a male supremacy. At this point, it just becomes pure misogyny. They want power over women. They want to regain power over women that they feel like they've lost. They feel like the women have the power because they're withholding sex, but they want to regain that power. So it's probably unsurprising that incel culture often inspires a lot of violence. A lot of violence towards women, but just a lot of violence in general. In 2014 in California, Elliot Rodger killed 6 people and injured a further 14 in an attempt to inspire a global war on women. He did this because he believed that women should be held responsible for depriving him of sex. He deserved sex. Why were the women not giving him it? And with that, the world had to pay for what women had done to him. And this is what I mean. He didn't even specifically go out and kill women. He just went out and killed because he was murderous. A literal mass murder was committed because one boy hated women that much. That's just one horrific example of how incels tend to operate when it gets to a certain level, and Ricardo was very quickly getting to those levels of depravity. He began to feel ignored by Bjork. At this point, it had been a couple of years of constant obsession and sending fan mail that she'd never responded to her. At this point in his diary, he wrote, "If she had just written back just once, I would have been happy." Of the 3 years that he was writing about Bjork in his diary, he had written 803 pages. 803 pages. Imagine being Bjork, by the way, and finding out that someone has this fucking encyclopedia on you. To be fair though, not all of it was about Bjork. A lot of it was actually about how much he just hated himself. He just thought he was so worthless, and he was always writing about it. At one point he said that he was a loser who never even learned to drive. And is that not giving Clueless? That is very nearly that Clueless quote, "You're a virgin who can't drive." Maybe it was a reference in a way. I guess, like, yeah, he did watch a lot of movies. Was that movie out at the time? The movie was out. It came out the year before he wrote that, I think. So yeah, maybe he did put a Clueless reference in his diaries. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Eventually, Ricardo stopped writing in his diaries and switched to videotapes. You know, the ones that we were talking about earlier. That was where all of his Bjork ramblings moved to. But by the time he stopped writing in it, his diary contained 408 references to Bjork and 52 references to obsessions with other celebrities as well. There were 168 references to feeling like a failure, 34 references to suicide, and 14 references to committing an actual murder. He talked about committing murder 14 times. Ricardo's state of mind was rapidly declining, and in 1996, things were about to take a sharp turn. Ricardo spotted an issue of Entertainment Weekly magazine as he was out in the shops, and he spotted Bjork on the front of it. Now, he would buy anything and everything Bjork. He wanted everything, and if she'd done an interview, he wanted to read it. So he buys it, and he's really excited. He takes it home to read it. But then as he does, his heart is completely shattered once again. He finds out that Bjork has a boyfriend. And things got even worse for Ricardo when he found out who Bjork was in a relationship with. It was musician, DJ Goldie. Ricardo was furious to see that the love of his life, Bjork, his angel, his wife, was dating a black man. Not only was Ricardo an obsessive incel, he was also a racist. And now cast your mind back to the beginning of the video when I said right at the end there was a slur used against African Americans on the wall. There you go. In his head, Bjork had betrayed him by getting a new boyfriend. He believed that Bjork owed him her love. He had given her so much of his. And so now he began fantasizing on how he could punish her for this. On January 14th, 1996, Ricardo turned 21 years old, and as a kind of twisted birthday present to himself, he went out and purchased that camera and tripod that later filmed his suicide. According to Ricardo, he got this camera, and I mean, he started like vlogging on it immediately, and he was telling the camera that the reason he was doing all of this was to document his life, his art, and his plan. But he didn't say what the plan was, just the plan. Directly to the camera, he says, "Comfort is what I seek in speaking to you. I am being my own psychologist. You are a camera, I am Ricardo." He shows the camera his 3 years worth of Bjork journals and says, "I started with a crush and ended up with an obsession." So he knows on some level that it's weird and that this isn't normal, this is very unhealthy. But I don't know, he seems just very, shameless, completely shameless. In Ricardo's apartment, of course, when they found him dead, police found 11 tapes in total that he had been recording over a period of 9 months. He would do little clips here and there. In total, all 11 of these tapes were 2 hours long, so it's 22 hours of footage. Quick maths. 11 times 2, Ellie. In the tapes, he is repeatedly using racial slurs against Goldie. He calls his and Bjork's relationship unacceptable. And he also threatens to get some revenge on Bjork for this. But again, he never gets more specific. He's very cryptic with his plan. That is until one specific entry where he says, "I'm just going to have to kill her. I'm going to send a package. I'm going to be sending her to hell." Ricardo despised himself and his own life, and now he was projecting that onto Bjork and Goldie, two people that shared the one thing that he desperately wanted but couldn't get: love, a relationship, companionship. He was jealous. He was jealous of both of them. And as his video diaries were getting more and more deranged, Ricardo began to hatch a wicked plan. He decided that he was going to construct a bomb and send it to Bjork. That was like the big blanket idea. But then he got to thinking, well, what kind of bomb? At first, he decided that he was going to get a bunch of hypodermic needles and fill them with HIV positive blood, and then like construct a weapon that when you opened it, all the needles would fire out and like fire into Bjork's arms and infect her. I don't really know how that plan was going to work, but he liked the idea because she would survive, but it would affect her life forever. There would be no way that Bjork could ignore him any longer. She would have to find out who he was. But Ricardo quickly realised he just didn't know how to do that. Don't blame him, I don't know how to do that either. So he came up with a different idea. So then, instead, he hollowed out a book, and all of this was done on camera, and he was completely naked as well. It's really fucking disturbing. Yes, I have seen it, and yes, I've seen his will. Yes, I have. I don't recommend it. The video is online, so don't go searching it up. It's horrid. So he gets out this book. It's hollowed out. He fills it with sulfuric acid, and it was set to explode, obviously, when someone opened it. He planned to send it directly to Bjork's home in London, so she would be the recipient. And the plan was that it would hopefully kill her. But failing that, he wanted it to just completely disfigure her. Of course, acid is it's gonna burn her, it's gonna melt her skin, she's gonna be disfigured forever. Ricardo would then commit suicide immediately after sending the bomb, hoping that in the event that his bomb did kill Bjork, then the two of them would be reunited in the afterlife. And on September 12th, he goes through with this plan. He posts the bomb successfully, then goes home, records his final video diary, and takes his own life, without knowing whether Bjork was going to die from his bomb or not. Once police discover the body and they discover all these tapes and they're made aware that there is a bomb on the way to Bjork's house, they shit themselves, obviously. Well, not literally, oh my god. They were very scared, right? So they call in the bomb squads to come and search Ricardo's home. Luckily, there were no other explosives in there. This was the only one that he'd made. Of course, police in London were contacted. They were told the whole situation, and luckily, the bomb was just sitting in a post office at this point in time. It made it all the way to South London, probably Bjork's local post office. So it was very, very close to reaching her house. Police managed to locate and intercept and safely detonate this bomb, and luckily no one was hurt. Well, apart from Ricardo himself. But what Ricardo never found out was that just a few days before he did all of this, a few days before he sent the bomb and killed himself, Bjork and Goldie had broken up. It just hadn't hit the media yet, which is just, I don't even know what to call that. Is that karma? Is it irony? Had he just waited a few more days, Bjork's single status would have hit the news, and maybe he would have felt a lot better. Maybe his anger would have subsided, and maybe he wouldn't have felt the need to kill her or kill himself. I mean, it's just all very, very sad on so many different levels, but thank God Bjork was physically unharmed. It turns out that she wasn't even in London at the time anyway. She was in Florida, where he was. She was literally a few blocks away from where Ricardo killed himself. And he never even knew that the woman that he so desperately adored was literally just down the road from him. It all just feels very eerie. I think that's the best word to describe it. It feels like fate. The bomb didn't make it there in time. Bjork wasn't home. Everything was just very close. And there were a lot of coincidental timings in this case, especially at the end. It's very Freaky Friday, hey. After Ricardo's suicide, Bjork was incredibly distressed by this whole thing, and she actually made a public statement about parasocial relationships like this. She said, "I make music, but in other terms, people shouldn't take me too literally and get involved in my personal life." After the incident, Bjork hid out in Spain for a while because she had become in demand with news publications and stuff. Everyone wanted to know how she felt about one of her fans killing himself for her. So she kind of fled to Spain, and there she recorded a new album. She hired a bunch of security, both for herself and for her family. She said, "I was very upset that somebody had died. I couldn't sleep for a week, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't scare the fuck out of me. That I could get hurt, and most of all, that my son could get hurt." But one thing that was actually pretty sweet about the end of this case was that Bjork sent a card and flowers to Ricardo's family to send her condolences, because at the end of the day, that was one of her fans, and she felt bad for his family, who were now going to be grieving Ricardo, and she felt somewhat responsible. While some people in his life were aware that Ricardo really liked Bjork, it never seemed like a dangerous obsession. It never seemed like it was gonna amount to anything anywhere near the level of violence that it did. And a psychiatrist that treated Ricardo shortly before his death said that he didn't appear dangerous. He had like anxiety, and that was about it. The psychiatrist really wasn't concerned with Ricardo, which is very, very scary that someone could be capable of something like this and even a psychiatrist wouldn't be able to tell that. It just goes to show that you just never really know what people are thinking or feeling. If they don't choose to share it with you, then you'll never know. So, I mean, anyone around you could be a stalker, a killer, could have these horrific plans in their head and you just wouldn't know. And yeah, that's a really scary note to end this video on, but thank you for watching. This was a real roller coaster to research. But I hope you guys are enjoying the Freaky Friday series. I'm really enjoying getting to speak about some other kinds of curses. Even though this one was quite, like, deathy. Even though it wasn't a murder, it very nearly was. If you have any suggestions for other stories or crazy concepts that you want us to cover on Freaky Friday, let us know down below in the comments. And thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this episode of Freaky Friday. Remember, there's the link down below. The first 500 of you to go and click that link will get 1 month free of Skillshare. And trust me, it's worth it. I would take advantage of that if I was you. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please, can I ask that you engage with it in some way? That would really help me out. A thumbs up, a comment, a share, anything. It goes a really long way for me and the whole team who put our whole entire ass into these videos. Is that a saying? You put your ass into it? I really don't think it is, actually. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like or a comment. If you want to watch another one of my videos, there'll be one on screen right now. Or you can click the little circle with my face in, and that will let you subscribe to my channel. I just glitched. I just malfunctioned. I filmed 2 videos today. I need to go to bed. Anyway, I'll see you next week. Bye!